welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today I'm going to be doing another round of horror book recommendations. I'm pretty sure I've only done like one actual video that was just like generally horror book recommendations, my favorite horror books. I know I've also done a video that was like horror books that should be movies, and so I suppose this is installment number 2 in like my horror book recommendations that I'm sure I'll do at least like once a year, maybe twice a year if I'm reading a lot of horror, but typically I read just about enough horror to update on like a yearly basis right now. Maybe that'll change in the future, but I will leave the link down below and in the cards above for my last video that I did of horror book recommendations if you want to get all caught up to all of my favorite horror books. But today I will be talking about all new horror books I've read since the last time I did this video and telling you about some of the favorites that I've stumbled upon in the last year or so. So let's just jump right on in. I'm not really going to go in any particular order. I really just enjoyed all of these books, so don't think of this as like a stack ranking. But the first one that I'm going to go over is A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. This book came out a couple of years ago, I think, and I've heard some people talk about it, but it's not like Josh Malerman's most widely known work. Obviously, his most widely known work is the Bird Box book and film adaptation, but I've been curious about this one because it just seemed like it was going to have an interesting vibe to it, and I really enjoyed this one. It wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but it turned out to be even better than I thought it would have been. This is a story about these two teenage kids in this town who are going on their first date, and they go out to this lake and they row through this lake and they come across a second lake that's like under a bridge, and then they go under another bridge and come across this other lake, and they're in this really isolated, middle of nowhere kind of place, and then they find there is this house at the bottom of the lake. It's exactly what it sounds like. There is a house that is just submerged under the lake, and so over the course of the summer they go back to this lake again and again to explore this house. They get scuba gear, they end up really trying to see what's going on down there. It's a very interesting situation because the house is very much intact. The furniture is still there, lamp cords and things are hanging as they should, the water's not really disrupting too much of the house, and so they're just very intrigued by it. So over the summer they continue to go back and explore the house, but they also are falling in love for the first time, and I really love that layer of the story, how there is a surface level story but then a deeper story going on, and just the overall sort of metaphor of it all. This book doesn't really spoon feed you everything that you should think about it. It is a shorter book, a shorter story, and it really leaves a lot of room for you to take away whatever you want from the story, and so I really enjoyed it. I really liked the summer vibe of it. I think it's a good summer read. It's not exactly horror in the fact that it is scary or intense or dark. It is more on the fantasy side, I would say, rather than being like a dark horror story. So it's definitely a genre bending book, but I would highly recommend this one. I really enjoyed it. Next up we have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a story that follows the perspective of one of Dracula's brides, and when the story begins you find out that Dracula has died and you don't really know how he got there, and then you go back in time to the beginning of their relationship to see what all has occurred over the span of time. This includes a polyamorous relationship between Dracula, the bride, and other people that they welcome into their marriage as well, and it is also a very abusive relationship, and so there is trigger warnings for that. If that is not something you're comfortable reading, then I would not recommend this one to you, but it follows their relationship over many years and how this woman just gets trapped in this really abusive, bad relationship. It's a very beautiful story. It is very lyrical writing and very haunting. It's also very short, and it is written in a sort of vignette style, so there ends up being a lot of little short chapters and blank pages. So this is one I read all in, I think, one sitting, so you can get through this one rather quickly. This definitely feels like it's a good, dark, gothic horror story to read at this time of year. But like I said, it does include an abusive relationship, so if that's something you're not comfortable reading, then I would not recommend this one to you. Next up, we have a little novella that everyone is talking about right now, and that is Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. I don't even really know where this came from. It just seems like one morning I woke up and heard the first whispers of this, and then the floodgates were released, and now everyone's reading it and everyone's talking about how weird it is and everyone is loving it. And I also really enjoyed this little novella. It is super short, just barely over 100 pages, and it's written in an interesting format. So this is a story that follows these two women. One of them is trying to sell an apple peeler online, and then the other one reaches out with interest to buy the apple peeler, and that's where it all begins, and then it ends up going in a drastic direction. It's set in the early 2000s, 2000s, so the entire story is told through emails and instant messages after this initial transaction goes on, and they end up going into a very dark relationship full of manipulation and toxicity and some really dark stuff. So this is not for the faint of heart. This is not for anyone who has a queasy stomach, but if you want to read something really gross and shocking that just flies by, and by the end of it you're sitting there like, what did I just read? This is another one that's really good for just reading all in one sitting. And if you really like the dark horror stuff, then you've definitely got to check this one out. Next up, I have a YA horror that I really enjoyed, and that is House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. More than anything, this book just has a really cool atmosphere, and it's a very memorable book. It definitely feels like the vibes this cover is giving off, with these flowers and these ants and the blood all on this girl's face. It has such an interesting, unique feel to it that it really has just left an impact on me, and I think about this book pretty often. This one is a story about these three sisters who, when they were younger, one day they just boom, out of nowhere disappear, and then they're missing for about a month, and then all of a sudden, boom, they reappear, and they come back different. Their hair is completely white, they have insatiable appetites, and they're left with a crescent moon shaped scar at the base of their neck. Ever since this incident, they have become infamous in the town. Like, everybody knows the story of these girls. They're always in the limelight. They become sort of famous in their own way themselves in their careers. But this story follows them several years later when the oldest sister goes missing, and she seems to have left a couple clues behind as to what could have happened to her. And the other two sisters unite to try to find out what happened to their oldest sister, but also they're left having to piece together what happened to them as children and how could that possibly be connected to what's going on now. And for a YA horror book, this is just really strong. It's got great writing, great imagery, great atmosphere. I love the storytelling. I love the theme of the sisterly love and trying to piece together something that happened in the past with what's going on now. So if you're looking for a YA horror recommendation, this is one that I would strongly recommend. Next up, we have a classic that I really love, and that is Dracula by Bram Stoker. First of all, can we just talk about how gorgeous this edition is for a second, with these sprayed edges and just how beautiful this leather-bound edition is. And the quote on the back of it, I just really love this copy. It was one of the Barnes & Noble classic editions. I did not read this copy. I read a different copy that I have because I just did not want to disturb this. But I really love this book, and I love having a beautiful edition of it that I can display. If you're unfamiliar with the story of Dracula, I was actually pretty unfamiliar with the story of Dracula when I first read it. I knew it was like a classic vampire story, but I did not know what the plot actually entailed. So I'll sum it up for you rather quickly. There's this man, Jonathan, who goes to work for Dracula. He does not know Dracula is a vampire, but over the course of his stay with Dracula, he figures it out pretty quickly, and he barely escapes with his life, fleeing back to the woman that he loves. But Dracula chased his tail and has now followed him to where Jonathan is back with the woman he loves, and Dracula has started terrorizing that town. And so it is very much a like cat and mouse style horror book. It is written so strongly. It's a classic for a reason. It is so fun to read. It very much has held up in the modern day. It's very readable. It has some great horror imagery that I really love. And of course, it's a classic for a reason. So it's a story you can really dissect and peel back the layers and really analyze what's going on and read into it a lot. So definitely a fun one if you're looking for one of the classic stories. If you're maybe intimidated by it because it's a classic, I really recommend this one. It's really fun to read, even in the modern day. Next up, I have a dystopian horror book that's not a classic. It's a newer book, but it feels like a classic. It feels like an instant classic that is going to be read for many years, studied in schools. It definitely is just such an interesting horror story, and that is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. This story has such a 1984 feel to it, but it's done in such a fresh way, just tackling completely different things. But if you really like 1984, then I really think you're gonna like this one too. In this world, there is a virus that has contaminated all animal meat, and because of that, the world has turned to cannibalism, and now they farm humans to eat human meat. And in this story, you're following this one guy who works at a factory, and he's just trying to get through the motions. He knows this is strange, but it has become commonplace, and he's trying to just do his job, make a living, but he can't deny this doesn't feel like this is what we should be doing. And then he ends up being gifted a human to farm himself, and you're not supposed to farm human connections connections with these humans that are being farmed. You're supposed to just kind of treat them like a farm animal, but he begins to develop a connection with this person, and that puts him in a pretty dangerous spot. And it is really just such an interesting story that examines so many big concepts in such a short amount of time. It is a shorter book. I think I read this one all in one sitting too. I tend to do that with horror books. I just fly through them really quickly because I really get sucked in. But this is one that has left a lasting impact on me. It is not for the queasy of stomach. It is as gross as it sounds, and even worse to think about eating human meat. It's as gross as it sounds, but it's really, really worth reading, and I would highly recommend it. Next up, this is a novella I feel like I talk about a lot, but I really love it, so it deserves a place in this video, and that is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones is just such a strong horror writer. If you're not reading Stephen Graham Jones stuff, I would highly recommend that you give his stuff a shot. I've read a couple of things from him now, and I've found that I really enjoy his novellas a little bit more than his novels and the longer form stuff, but he's really just such a talented writer, and he just does horror so well. This novella in particular is a story about these group of teens who try to pull a prank on their friends with a mannequin, but then it goes very, very awry, and all hell breaks loose across the town because this mannequin may or may not have come to life and be seeking revenge against the teens. It's a really short book, so I don't need to say more than that, but just know it is super fast-paced, super fun, and it doesn't really take itself too seriously. So if you like a little bit of a cheesy horror story, then I would definitely recommend this one. It is so much fun. Next up, this book is a bit of a genre bender. So it's not totally horror, but it definitely has strong threads of horror throughout it, and that is All's Well by Mona Awad. Mona Awad just writes in a genre completely unique to herself. She writes these really genre-bending books that have horror and fantasy elements, and it's hard to really pinpoint exactly where it should be categorized, but it definitely has enough horror in it for me to talk about it in this video. This is a story about a college theater director who is dealing with a lot of chronic pain after an accident that she had when she was performing in theater many years ago. Currently, as a theater director, she is trying to get her students to put on a production of the Shakespeare play All's Well That Ends Well, but they really want to put on Macbeth, and they are very disgruntled to be having to do this play that they really don't want to do, they don't understand, and they don't understand why she's so strong-willed about getting them to put this play on. Meanwhile, she, like I said, is dealing with a ton of chronic pain, and she goes and sees physicians, and nobody in her life believes her about her pain or really understands it. That goes for the physicians that she goes to see. She tries out many different types of doctors, and even the friends and colleagues around her just don't really offer her the support that she needs, and they don't really believe her about the immense pain that she is in. Then the fantasy element comes into play, and Miranda gets the opportunity to bestow her pain amongst others. And that's really all I need to say. The rest from there is a wild ride. The only other thing I've read from Mona Awad before is Bunny, and this definitely has similar vibes where at times it feels like an absolute fever dream and you're not entirely sure what's going on, but I love this so much. It is so extremely well written. You really feel Miranda's pain, both in terms of her physical pain, but also the emotional pain and the toll it takes on her for nobody to be believing or supporting her, and to be dealing with all these students who just all they want to do is push back against her. But this tells such an interesting story, and I wasn't really familiar with the Shakespeare plays All's Well That Ends Well or Macbeth, and so after reading this book I did some research and digging in and learning about the books, and I also listened to a lot of interviews from Mona Awad herself, who did virtual book tours for the book, so you can find those on YouTube if you want to listen yourself. But I have come to appreciate this book to a whole nother level after digging in and realizing what she did with this book. It's just so clever. She writes such great stories, and I really feel like there's no other author like her. So highly recommend checking out Mona Awad's stuff. Both this and Bunny are great, so I wouldn't really recommend one over the other. It would probably just be more of a personal preference to which story sounds more interesting to you, but I would definitely recommend checking her stuff out if you haven't yet. And then the last book I have to recommend is another young adult horror, and that is The Dead in the Dark by Courtney Gould. This story follows a girl and her two dads, and they are moving back to the dad's hometown called Snakebite. The dads are also these paranormal investigators. They have a whole TV show called Paraspectors, and so they're quite an interesting bunch. They return to Snakebite because there are some weird things going on in the town. The weather is unseasonably hot, and teens keep going missing, and all fingers in the town seem to be pointing to these ghost hunter dads. Everyone thinks that whatever's going on in the town must be related to them. And so in the story you follow their daughter Logan, who ends up teaming up with this girl Ashley, who is the girlfriend of the first guy who ended up going missing in this town. town, and they team up to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Logan wants to defend her dads and show they are not responsible, but also she just wants this whole thing to be over so that she can leave this really boring town. And Ashley, of course, wants to investigate to figure out what happened to her boyfriend. The two girls have very different personalities, but over the course of the book, they end up developing feelings for each other, and this potentially includes a sapphic relationship as well. This book has all the good spooky vibes. You have a small town, you've got these ghost hunting dads, you've got these two girls trying to figure out what's going on together while they're also kind of falling in love, and it is just so much fun. It is definitely my favorite YA horror I've ever read, so if you're trying to get into YA mysteries or horrors, I would definitely recommend this one. So that concludes all of the latest horror book recommendations that I have for you. It's a mix of a little bit of everything, some super short reads, some super creepy dark reads, so hopefully you found something new that you can add to your TBR pile. If there are any other types of horror book recommendations you're looking for, definitely let me know down in the comments below. I feel like I don't do nearly enough horror videos and I'd really like to do more, so if there are any ideas you're wanting to see, just let me know and I will add that to my list. But that is it from me. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!